I had a user comment asking for help finding a fixed length, easy to tie, non-jamming loop. And they didn't want to use any of the usual suspects, which means no bowline and no figure eight. Quite a good puzzle. And the great thing about this is that the viewer had actually done some experimentation with the perfection loop to try to produce the knot that he was looking for. So he proposed to replace this half hitch in the perfection loop with a round turn, which will lead to a little bit of a bulkier knot, and you could see how maybe that might lead to something that doesn't bind down quite as tightly, it would be easier to untie. Unfortunately, in this case, it didn't quite work out. This doubled perfection loop still has quite a lot of internal friction, so it's not going to be easy to untie when loaded. However, there's another knot, which is famously easy to untie, and that is the Zeppelin Bend. To tie the Zeppelin Bend, think about forming a D with the working end passing underneath the standing part, and a P with the working end passing over. Then set the P on top of the D, and pass the working ends oppositely through the overlapping loops. Notice the working ends come out on opposite sides. We give a little tug on the working ends, and then give a little tug on the standing part. We will get a bend that is basically impossible to jam. Now the nice thing about a bend is, if you know a bend, you also know a loop. So if we just tug this apart a little bit, just to get a sense of how these two lines are interacting, we see that we have a pair of overhand loops that are crossing each other. And if we think about the two ends being connected, that will be an end loop that we can use. So here we go. With the working end in the left hand, form a bite. Then cross that bite over the standing part to form a loop. Tuck the working end back in behind and pull through to form an overhand knot. Notice the crossings are on the right side. You want to think of this as having an upper lobe and a lower lobe. Now take the working end and bring it around to the right and pass it through the upper lobe from behind. Now bring the working end back over to the right to form a loop. Now we're going to pass that working end down through the lower lobe from the front and bring it right back up through the loop we just formed. Give it a little tug, tug on the standing part, and you can see that we are forming a Zeppelin bend. There's our first overhand knot and our second overhand knot. Pulling it up tight, we see that we have our completed Zeppelin loop. And we have the issue of this working end. It's sitting directly across from the standing part, which is one of the ways you can make a Zeppelin loop. There's another one we're not covering in this video, but this working end's kind of in the way. No problem. If we tug on the right side of the loop, the working end neatly tucks itself away from the loop, and we end up with this really nice double crossing into the loop that's going to tend to hold this loop open. And this is a really brilliant loop because no matter how hard you pull on it, how hard it cinches up, it'll always come right back apart. All you need to do is unwind these turns by grabbing the working end, tugging it up a little bit, grabbing your collar here with the opposing thumb, and opening it back up into the Zeppelin bend. From here, tug on the two loops, and it comes right apart.